Back in a day when I was first getting into the topic and learning the basics of the canvas, I encountered diagrams showing the structure of frames, and just looking at these diagrams made me feel sick, and I struggled through them in a great pain. Today, after many years of working with CAN, I believe that most of this information, especially at the beginning of your journey, is simply unnecessary. So today I will tell you only about the two most important segments of a CAN frame. The two most important segments of a CAN frame are the identifier and the data. All other segments are handled by hardware controllers, and in normal operation we don't even have access to them. There's no need to study them at the beginning. So if you are going to transmit a CAN frame, you will do it roughly like calling a function where you provide two parameters, the identifier and the data bytes to send. From the other hand, if you are monitoring traffic on the bus, you will only look at these same two things. For example, reading sniffer logs. You just look at the ID and the data, which is the payload. The ID field is the numerical identifier of the message. For example, let's assume a frame containing engine parameters will have identifier 25. This number will be assigned only and exclusively to this type of message, transmitted cyclically by that particular device. No other frame on the bus can have the same ID number. However, one node can transmit more than one type of message. The system architect decides which ID numbers are sent by which devices. And in the case of CAN, there are no standards or requirements for this. So each manufacturer decides about this arbitrarily. What's really interesting is the ID number also indicates the priority of the message. So the lower is the number, the higher the priority. So the highest possible priority would be a frame with an identifier equal to 0. Okay, but what does this priority actually mean? Practically, it's a safeguard against the rare situation where two different devices would start transmitting their frame at exactly the same point of time. We can consider it as a conflict, a fight when frame with a lower ID number wins, and that frame is transmitted completely to the end, while the second node interrupts its transmission, waiting patiently for the next possibility when the frame can be transmitted. In one of the next episodes, I will explain in more details the arbitration mechanism and how it works. A CAN frame has identifiers with a length of 11 or 29 bits. These lengths are also called standard and extended. The second important segment of the CAN frame is data, which we also call payload. This is the actual meat of the frame, meaning the collection of information we want to transmit or receive. Data has a length expressed always in full bytes, up to maximum of 8 bytes for classic CAN and 64 bytes for CAN FD. When we connect to a typical CAN or LIN bus in a car, we will see how this data changes. But how do we know what it means? For the complete picture, we are missing the car manufacturer's guidelines on the arrangement of signals in the frame. I mean, how those frames need to be decoded. So, what are signals? Signals are parameters or variables. Most often, these are physical quantities packed into a frame. Let's assume that the engine controller sends data about its operation to the onboard computer. The parameters contained in this message are RPM, temperature, and fuel consumption. For each of these signals, the manufacturer specifies the length. For example, RPM transmitted to the computer can be recorded in 12 bits, temperature in 10 bits, and fuel consumption just in 8 bits using a scalar for conversion into the real values. This data is placed in the payload according to the layout and then transmitted on the bus in such a combined form. So if we wanted to fully interpret what we observe on the bus, we would need to extract certain data from the frame so as to refer only to the signal that interests us. When trying to reverse engineer a product, you can, for example, try to cause changes in it. Pressing some button and then observe how the data on the bus changes as a result of this action, and in this way you can try to estimate where a given signal is stored and what format it has. But that's a topic for a completely different episode. So if you like this video, leave a comment or a thumbs up. For me, that's an information on whether it is worth making more of those videos. Thank you and cheers!